Good afternoon. This has been very cheery so far, hasn't it? I hope to follow on from what Adam and John have been speaking about to discuss police body cameras and the role that the federal government is playing in body cameras and also their costs and benefits. I see if you're on the right side of the room, you might be regretting that you're not in view of my great PowerPoint presentation, but I assure you it's mostly, there won't be too much that's informative. It's mostly pictures, so you don't have to stare at me for the entirety of the talk. But I thought it would be important to begin by discussing a town that John and Adam and Tim all mentioned, which is Ferguson. And many of you will know that in November 2014, a St. Louis County grand jury declined to indict Ferguson, Missouri police officer Darren Wilson for the killing of Michael Brown. And Brown's killing sparked protests all across the country. And in the wake of the news that Wilson would not be facing charges, the Obama administration proposed a $75 million, 3-year, 50% matching funding program for the purchase of 50,000 body cameras. And this isn't a surprise. Body cameras have been a staple in police misconduct discussions. There's a widespread belief that they prompt some kind of observer effect, that people behave better when they know that they're under observation, whether you're a citizen or a police officer. And indeed, there is some evidence to back this up. The most widely cited study on this took place in Rialto, California. And a new police chief came in and he outfitted his officers with body cameras, and they recorded use of force incidents and complaints against the police and compared that number to the years before the body cameras. And what they found is that in the year when body cameras were deployed, there was a dramatic reduction in use of force incidents and complaints against the police. A more recent study that was published last month examined 4,200 officer shifts in 7 sites. This was about 1.5 million hours worth of body camera footage. And they compared again the year before and the year of body cameras. And they found a 93% reduction in citizen complaints against the police. There are a number of reasons why it might be so dramatic. For one, I think this study required officers to inform citizens that they were on camera before the interaction took place. I don't want it to paint too rosy a picture. Not all the studies have found as dramatic results. Here are results from San Diego. They found in the year when body cameras were used, or the time period when body cameras were used, there was actually an increase in use of force. Although there was a decline in what's called greater controlling use of force incidents. So those are tasers, pepper sprays, and things like that. But the only benefits might not be on the behavior of police and citizens. Body camera footage and other footage have proven very valuable in investigations into police misconduct. So many of you will be aware of the Walter Scott shooting that took place in North Charleston, South Carolina. The officer involved, Michael Slager, will have a murder trial, which is starting at the end of this month. The Eric Garner killing was captured on cell phone footage, although the officer involved in that was not charged. And when it comes to body cameras, I'm sure many of you will be aware of the Samuel DuBose shooting, which took place in Cincinnati. Ray Tensing, the officer involved there, is facing murder and voluntary manslaughter charges, and his trial will begin at the end of this month. The prosecutor in that case described the body camera footage as invaluable in bringing charges. This piece of footage, this is from Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is the killing of James Boyd. He was a homeless, paranoid schizophrenic who was camping out in the foothills of the Sanandia Mountains. And it was actually announced yesterday that the second-degree murder charges, the trial here ended in a mistrial. This was announced yesterday. But the district attorney, when this began, said that we have evidence in this case to establish probable cause we didn't have in other cases. So there seems to be pretty good evidence that body cameras have some beneficial effect on officers and citizens, although to what degree it's affecting citizens more than police officers, I think, remains to be seen. And it's certainly the case that body cameras have proven very useful in investigations into police misconduct. But I think it's also worth us thinking about the costs here. Police regularly interact with people who are drunk, high, mentally ill. They talk to children who have been sexually assaulted. They are first on the scene at many accidents. They talk to informants and undercover agents. So when we're considering a body camera policy, we really do have to be careful about the privacy concerns associated. I've taken some pictures from body camera footage to highlight some of this. The top left, that's a man stabbing a police officer. In the bottom left is a man undergoing a drug overdose in his car. The top right and bottom right pieces of footage show a SWAT raid that took place in Indiana. And I'm highlighting these screenshots because they give, I think, a good idea about what police are seeing. The SWAT raid footage is particularly, I think, disturbing because you're seeing the interior of someone's home. You can tell a lot about someone by what they watch on television or what's on their bookshelves, and in political posters, religious icons, things like that. The man in the car is not a violent criminal or anything. He's undergoing a medical trauma, yet I found that very easily on YouTube. The man stabbing the officer, well, his face has been blurred, but he still has rather distinctive tattoos. It wouldn't be that difficult if you knew the jurisdiction to figure out who that man was. And in light of these concerns, I wrote a paper for Cato highlighting what I think the right policy should be so we can get this balance right between accountability and privacy. I think that the important thing is that incidents that take place in private homes, that body camera footage should not be available to members of the public. It should be available to the homeowner, their attorney, or their next of kin, but not anyone to request. I don't have the same view about incidents that take place in public. If you don't have an expectation of privacy and the officer doesn't, I think members of the public should be able to see body camera footage that shows searches, shootings, and detentions. Now, today we've been discussing that, of course, law enforcement is primarily a state and local issue, but I think there is an important role here for the federal government. As I mentioned earlier, the Obama administration, shortly after Ferguson, indicated a strong interest in body cameras. And body cameras aren't cheap. They impose a bit of a fiscal burden on a lot of departments, and the Department of Justice has issued body camera grants. But what I want to stress today is that the Department of Justice has issued body camera grants to departments that do not have good policies in place, that do not promote accountability or transparency. In 2015, the Department of Justice gave $23 million in body camera grants to 73 departments in 32 states. The Los Angeles Police Department was one of these departments. It received $1 million, despite the fact that the Los Angeles policy requires police officers under investigation to view body camera footage before they make statements. And the policy also did not explicitly have prohibitions on using body camera footage for general surveillance. This year, there was $20 million awarded to 106 departments in 32 states. And one of the states where these departments were is North Carolina. And many of you will, I'm sure, have followed the news out of Charlotte and have heard something about the law on the books now in North Carolina, which prevents members of the public like you and me to access body camera footage absent without a court order. This is not a policy that promotes accountability or transparency, and I think if the federal government is going to be involved in funding body cameras, the very least it can do is ensure that money only goes to departments that have demonstrated a commitment to transparency and accountability while also protecting privacy. And I'll finish very quickly with this note. Body cameras are just a tool. They're not good or bad in virtue of their existence. They're made good or bad tools by the rules that govern them. And with the right tools in place, they really are great tools for accountability and transparency, as the Samuel DeBose shooting, I think, highlights. But we shouldn't forget that without the right policies in place, they're a rather terrifying tool of government surveillance. And there's a number of things on the horizon that I want us all to keep in mind. Very few departments have policies explicitly banning the use of facial recognition software on police body camera footage. It's also very important that departments have policies in place that limit the access that officers have to body camera footage. We don't want police deciding in their spare time to sit down and trolling through body camera footage to see who was where doing what, especially if there's no probable cause. That all said, I am a long-term optimist when it comes to these tools, but I do worry about the federal government's role, the policies that it is adhering to, but ultimately, it's up to people who work up here on Capitol Hill to ensure that those strict policies are put in place. Thank you.